Welcome to this module on developing a strategy tree or developing an objectives tree. I love to teach this model because you'll get some fresh ideas that can help you design projects at the fuzzy front end. Especially useful if you have complexity, if you have multiple players involved, if you're not quite sure how to get started, this is a great way to start. This builds on some of the principles we talked about in the prior module, principally the idea of causal thinking, as well as chunking, and as well as risk management. You'll see these come into play in this tool called the Strategy Objectives Tree. Now this is an optional tool. You can start a logical framework without going through this, but if you have one of those big, hairy, audacious projects, start here. The second reason I enjoy teaching this, it involves a colorful, dramatic case study that you're going to be part of. In 1992, I was called by the Washington State Department of Agriculture's chief entomologist to solve what had become a national emergency, the invasion of the Asian Gypsy Moth, and it was trouble. In fact, today I'm proudly wearing my Asian Gypsy Moth survey button. Let's get a close-up of this so you can see it. There you go. There's the menacing moth. So let me begin with a little bit of theory on objectives trees, how they're useful. Then we'll go into a case study and we'll finish with how you can apply them. Trees are visual displays of cause-effect logic. You've seen some examples. They show the big picture and they force clear thinking. They give you the helicopter view that is so often missing when we do our front-end planning. It makes the strategic logic explicit through cause, effect, if-then linkages. And if you're not able to describe a strategy using if-then thinking and put it on a piece of paper, you probably haven't thought it through clearly enough. And if you have put it on a piece of paper, you can share it with other people, you can communicate it, they can chime in, improve it, leading to an optimum strategy. It also helps you to identify any elements that may be missing, so you can plug those in at the beginning. Point out some of the interfaces and coordination needs with other people, other projects, other programs. Bottom line, improves the design at the most important part of a project, the fuzzy front end. Causal logic links objectives together with a simple if-then logic. In the logical framework, you see a hierarchy of objectives that begins at the goal and works down. So in order to accomplish C, we must do B. In order to do B, we must do A. And we can test the hypothesis by working up using if-then logic. If we do A, and A may be a series of activities, then we can make B happen. If B happens, then C will happen. Very simple causal logic. But sometimes it's more complex than that, so we turn to objectives trees. In order to make C happen, we must first accomplish B. In order to make B happen, there may be several activities or outcomes at the A level. So this is top-down thinking, and then the bottom-up thinking will test it. If A1 through A4, then B. If B, then C. Now I'm being a little theoretical, so let me give some examples. Let's say your objective is to improve profits. How might you do it? Well, it begins with managing expenses as well as growing revenues. And if we do those two things, we'll improve profits. How do you manage expenses? Well, perhaps you might need to reduce waste and improve your processes. So that's the top-down derivation. Now we can test it bottom-up by asking, if we reduce waste and improve processes, do we manage expenses? What else might be necessary? In order to grow revenues, we need to introduce new products and market effectively, but maybe we just improve the product we have. So you can look at alternatives as well. And if these two things, we ought to be able to grow revenues. There's an interesting what, why, how relationship between any three hierarchical objectives. Now let's say this is the what. As you look up the chain, it answers the question, why are we doing this? As you look down the chain, it answers the question, how. These terms are in trees and they slide. They're not fixed. They can move up and down. When you move these same terms, what, why, and how, into logical frameworks, they become anchored to a particular definition, and we'll get into that in the next module. Here's a simple example. Let's say your what is to get fit and healthy. Why do you want to do that? To live long. How are you going to do that? Well, through exercising daily and eating smart. Now, when I said these objectives can slide, what if we slide them up and make the what objective, the live long, then the how is to get fit and healthy. And then the new why objective, why do you want to live long, can be to see my grandkids. My involvement with the Asian Gypsy Moth project began with a phone call from the chief entomologist of the Washington State Department of Agriculture. Hello, it's Terry Schmidt. Sure, I remember you from the Logical Framework training. What's up? The Asian Gypsy Moth is invaded? Well, how much trouble can a few insects be? Are you serious? They can defoliate the entire Pacific Northwest? So, how do you stop them? So you're saying you have to grow your team from 3 to 300 people within 6 weeks and be fully functional and go out and find the moths and destroy them? That's huge. Sure, I'll help. Let's meet at 8 o'clock in your office tomorrow morning. Wow. It turned out that in 6 weeks, the U.S. Forest Service would deploy 12 helicopters to fly over major areas in the Puget Sound, Seattle region, and outlying areas. They would spray a thin biological mist called BC, or Bacillus thuringitis, over several counties. My client would then have to deploy tens of thousands of insect traps over 1,000 square mile area to catch those not killed by the spray. This was a tremendous undertaking with short time deadlines and no margin for error. Organizing complex projects at the fuzzy front end and getting everyone on the same page early is something the Logical Framework approach helps you to do very well. But in this case, we started with objectives trees. The Washington State Department of Agriculture would end up putting out over 180,000 of these insect traps. Let me explain how these work. The traps are triangular shaped. They come in green and orange. In the inside, they're coated with a sticky substance. If a moth lands on that, he stays. Hanging from the middle is an artificial sex pheromone that's designed to attract male moths. So if you attract a male moth, you know there's a nest nearby because the males take care of the nest. That allows the trappers or the survey team to go in neighborhood by neighborhood, find the specific tree where the moths are hanging out and spray them. So it's kind of like being moth busters. So your assignment is to help develop an objectives tree. A few weeks after I came aboard, there was a national story on NBC News which explains all the project elements fairly nicely. So we'll play that video. I encourage you to watch it twice. And as you do, listen carefully for objectives and write each one down. The clue to an objective is it begins with the verb. Then with your objectives, draw a big picture tree showing the if-then relationships. Don't try to make it perfect. Draw your tree. We'll come back and walk through a solution.
It's a little bug, an ordinary-looking caterpillar that has spread the alarm around the Northwest. Government officials have been looking for them for months, setting up traps in Washington and Oregon and British Columbia, their spirits sinking as they realized their worst fears were true. It's the Asian Gypsy Moth, and it's trouble.
The potential to spread throughout all of North America is very clear with this particular pest, and because of the broad host range and the real devastating complete defoliation that it's capable of producing, it's a very risky proposition.
How bad could it be? If the Asian moth gets a toehold in these forests of the Northwest, the economic devastation could make fights over things like the spotted owl over conservation seem like insignificant sideshows. Here is how the moths arrived as unwelcome guests from Asia, little batches of eggs laid directly on the superstructures of freighters from Siberian ports, and from there to the forest.
The Asian, because the female is able to fly, can spread great distances very quickly.
So far, they've caught just a few dozen adults, but that is easily enough to start widespread infestation. And this voracious little beast could, in a matter of a few years, strip literally millions of acres of valuable timber. Experts took a guess at what an unchecked infestation would cost, and the numbers are staggering, anywhere up to $58 billion. There is in all this gloom just one bit of good news. They might have caught it just in time.
Now, we either deal with it effectively this year or it begins to spread and the problem begins to get much, much bigger.
There's a state of emergency now in this whole area. Beginning next month, officials will begin spraying over a huge area bacteria that is harmless to humans and animals, but deadly to the caterpillar. Or at least it better be, or this part of the nation might lose its most valuable resource. Keith Morrison, NBC News, Seattle.
So let's go through an objectives tree. At the highest level, the objective was save the forests and protect the quality of life in the Pacific Northwest. You may have had something like that if you talked about the economy. That's great as well. But we want a high-level visionary objective that allowed the governor to explain to the citizens why there would be low-flying helicopters spraying mist over their neighborhoods. Did you have something like kill the existing moths? Great. How are we going to kill the moths? Well, we're going to spray the affected areas by helicopter. That will be the U.S. Forest Service. This is not our objective, but it's part of the larger program. Then when that's happened, we can set the traps to find the moths and respray. That's Washington State Department of Agriculture. But let me ask you, is there an objective between killing the moths and saving the forests? Well, we came up with this: eliminate the moths in Washington, because there were new ones coming in, and we needed to get rid of them as well. So how do we do that? Well, we need to prevent the entry of new moths, and they were coming in via Siberian freighters. How do we do that? Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had a component. They would inspect and spray all the incoming ships. So this was the basic objectives tree. Now there's a couple other elements. We also needed to eliminate the moths in British Columbia, Canada, as well as in the state of Oregon. Central stream of objectives are going to fit into our logical framework, where the others are outside of our direct control, but still necessary for success. So these are our objectives, and these are going to fit into the logical framework, but the other things that are necessary to climb up this hierarchy are some of these objectives. We put them in a different color to indicate that they are beyond our control. They're not our projects, they are other people's projects, and many of them are going to become assumptions in our project. Now, I've also circled at the bottom the things that we can directly affect, the causes we put in motion to get the effects of killing the moth, eliminating the moth, and saving the forest and the trees. Cause-effect relationships. One of the principles we covered in the last module was the idea of chunking, and this is extremely important to get clarity in your projects. Some projects will have predictable phases. In construction we have them, in software development we have them, but a lot of projects require that you create phases. In this case, we broke down the objective of setting the traps to find the moths and respray into phases. It started up with startup. That means getting the people hired, getting the systems in place, getting the traps built and deployed, getting people trained, a lot of work at the front end, intensive work to start up. Then we moved into an operations phase. Over the next 3 months, checking the traps to see if we had a moth, and if so, that created excitement. Finally, at the end of the season, towards the fall, there would be a demobilization phase, pulling down all the traps, recycling them, and so forth, followed by evaluation. Now, each of these phases had its own logical framework. You'll see some of these in future episodes. So let's debrief your objectives tree. Did it include a big picture objective at the top? Something like saving the forest, protecting the economy. This is absolutely critical if you're trying to position your project, if you're trying to sell your project, if you're trying to show the benefits to the ultimate stakeholders. Did you distinguish kill from eliminate? There are different objectives in the hierarchy, and it's important to distinguish these objectives if you're trying to evaluate how high up the ladder of cause-effect your project goes. Did you identify and incorporate some of the other project elements, such as the helicopter spraying and the ship inspection? They may be beyond your direct control. They may not be part of your project, but to think more strategically, it's important to see how those fit. In fact, the overall program manager of this would have to make sure all those elements dovetailed very nicely. And finally, do you have clear connecting logic, if-then logic? If not, don't worry about it. This was the first try. By the way, there are some exercises in the workbook. Go ahead and go through those, and you'll find solutions as well. The more you do these, the more skills you'll have. So how do you know when your tree is complete? You can call it complete when the planning team is convinced that the causal linkages they've described using if-then language depict the main cause-effect relationships in the situation being analyzed. In other words, does it describe the issue? Does it describe the problem solution that you're aiming for? And when there's enough clarity to organize a project into logical chunks, usually for logical frameworks. Let me give you an example. Objectives trees identify potential log frame chunks. Now let's say this is your tree. This might be project number 1. This is project number 2 with a different team. This project number 3. Here are some tips for developing a useful tree. First, brainstorm to generate a list of objectives. The best way to do this is with other key stakeholders, team members, people who matter in the project. Try putting them on Post-it notes. Stick them on the wall. You can move them around. It creates a great deal of energy. Put the highest level objective at the top and organize them underneath by if-then logic. Here's the key question. What objectives at each lower level are necessary to reach the objective at the higher level? Continue working down until you reach discrete outcomes or deliverables that a person or a team can make happen. And then test the logic by working up from the bottom using the if-then, draw some lines together, and voila, you have a tree. In the materials which accompany this video, you'll find a nice description with more detail on how to develop quality trees. A couple caveats. Not everything on your brainstorm list will logically fit. Don't expect it to. There'll always be some miscellaneous stuff. Just put that aside. Some objectives may be the same thing in different words. Let's say we had a team doing this and one said, eliminate the moth, another said, annihilate the moth, another said, destroy the moth, another one said, wipe them all out. Probably mean the same thing, so decide on what words are important. Some of the objectives may instead be measures of other objectives, and you'll see examples of that in some of the later modules. You may need to add some additional intermediate objectives if the jump between levels is too large. And finally, distinguish causal from sequential logic. Causal logic means that A causes B to happen, or at least contributes to it, whereas sequential logic says that B happens after A, but not necessarily because of it. It's a subtle distinction, but once you master this, it'll truly make you strategic. We see in bar charts and Gantt charts a lot of sequential logic, but we seldom see causal logic, and that's the key to connecting what your project can accomplish to the higher level objectives that really motivate the effort. So, key point summary. First, remember, trees are basically an application of causal logic. You form a program hypothesis with a tree, enabling you to test it, share it, improve it. Perfect tool to clarify and improve strategy at the fuzzy front end. Mostly helpful in complex situations. And again, it's a prior step to the log frame, not always needed, but I wanted you to have it in your toolkit. So in the next module, we'll dive deeper into the logical framework so you see some of the other elements, and we'll come back to the Asian Gypsy Moth log frame as an example. And in the handouts, we have additional reference material for those who want to know more about the scientific basis of this or what to do should one of these nests appear in your backyard. But until then, may your life and your projects be pest-free.